So welcome everybody. We're just waiting for people to join. Let's give it another 1 minute. You're at the Storytelling for Social and Planetary Change, the second meeting that we have. Let's give it a second till everyone has joined. I can't see, since I share my screen, I can't see how many people have. Oh, there are 30. Yeah. I think we can start. Welcome everybody to this second meeting in our 4-week, let's see, okay, in our 4-week event co-organized by the Pachaisana Institute and the Counterpoint about storytelling for social and planetary change. We had a first meeting last week where we introduced the topic and had a first experience about the theme. And today we will move on with a more concrete engagement with one aspect of the topic. And again, we are very grateful for our sponsors. So not only the Pachaisana Institute and Counterpoint, but particularly also the Wilsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University, and also from FIU, the Religious Studies Department, as well as the Department of English at FIU. We are very grateful to have this support from you. And we already, last week, we already realized how important this and how engaging this topic is in general. And today we want to focus on storytelling as knowing, because one way to think about how we know about the world in which we live is through storytelling. When we first get to know a person, a place, a thing, or any other entity, we often start by listening to a story. The same happens when non-human persons meet, or when we meet non-human actors ourselves. It is also true for places, ideas, and just about anything else we get to know. Stories help us attune to our shifting selves and the bodies around us to which we are connected. Stories are always ongoing and open-ended, and they are all interpreted differently by their listeners. In a word, stories are contextual. Our race, gendered, sexed, and classed bodies all provide us with different lenses on the world through which we tell our own stories. For indigenous peoples across the world, storytelling is a primary means for knowledge transmission. So that is what we will be focusing on today. And I'm very glad to announce our 3 panelists here who will, in the first part of this webinar, share their own views on the topic and have a conversation among themselves. And then we will open up the floor to Q&As from all participants. In the first speaker today is Polly Walker. She's a chair of the Indigenous Education Institute and director of the Baker Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies at Juanita College. Her work focuses on transforming conflict between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples and the role of ritual in these processes. She is a co-editor of Acting Together, Performance and the Creative Transformation of Conflict, and serves as a member of the Executive Committee of Impact, a global platform for the arts, cultural, and conflict transformation. Then we have David Abram, who is an American philosopher, cultural ecologist, and performance artist, best known for his work bridging the philosophical tradition of phenomenology with environmental and ecological issues. He's the author of Becoming Animal, an Earthly Cosmology, and The Spell of the Senses, Perception and Language in the More Than Human World, for which he received, among other awards, the International Land Literary Award for Nonfiction. Finally, we have Juan Sanchez, who grew up in Bogota or Bogota, Colombian Andes. He dedicates both his creative and scholarly writing to indigenous cultural expressions from Abiala, the Americas. His book of poetry, Alta Mar, was awarded in 2016 with the National Prize, Universidad de Antioquia, Colombia. He is currently a professor of languages and literatures and Native American and Indigenous Studies at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. So what will happen is that we will have these three speakers first. I invite them to share their own take on the topic, and they will speak for like 15 minutes each. Then we will have the chance to provide a conversation among the panelists, and then we still have like 20 or 30 minutes for open questions from the audience. For that, you can then use the Q&A function of Zoom. After 1 hour and a half, we will have a break of 15 minutes, and then we will start with the second part of this event, which is the workshop with Juan. I hope that you will all, or many of you will stay for that too, which is a more personal engagement with the topic. So I look very much forward to the next 2 hours, and I give the floor to Polly Walker.
I'm speaking today from the homelands of the Oñata Aga, the people of the Standing Stone, the Oneida Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. Sio, Chichalagi, Daxida Kodo Anatahida Idehesti. Greetings, I'm of Cherokee descent, a member of the Cherokee Southwest Township. My Cherokee name is Daxi, and my work is focused on processes that support us all living together in peace. I want to share today my experiences of storying between humans and other beings in our cosmos. Many of our indigenous elders speak of a time when humans and the natural world communicated clearly and freely. N. Scott Momaday, Kiowa author, poet, and knowledge holder, explains, if we could imagine a time when dogs could talk, we must imagine a time when language was intensely creative, full of power and magic. Cherokee elders also mark a time when storying between two-leggeds, animals, and plants was the norm. And I'm going to share an old story with you today. This particular version is from Noati Herbals. The old ones say that at one time, all of creation spoke the same language. The plants could communicate with the finned ones. The four-leggeds could speak with the trees. The stones could talk with the wind. And even the most dependent, most pitiful part of creation, the two-leggeds, or as we have come to call ourselves, the humans, could also speak with other parts of creation. All existed in harmony. The plants, the animals, and the elements of the four directions all knew that if the two-leggeds were to survive, they would need help. The animals gave of themselves, willingly sacrificing so that the humans could have food. They knew that their skins were much better suited to survival than that of the humans, so they allowed their skins to be taken and used for clothing and shelter. The finned ones, the flyers, and the crawlers also allowed themselves to be used by the humans to ensure their survival. The plant people, the standing people, the trees, and the stone people, the rocks, freely gave of themselves, so that the humans had what they needed for food, clothing, and shelter. An agreement was forged that the two-leggeds would ask permission for these gifts, give thanks for the sacrifice, and take no more than they needed. And so it was good. But then the two-leggeds started growing in numbers and began to feel themselves more important than the rest of creation. They began to believe that the web of life revolved around them, ignoring the fact that they were just one small part of the circle. The two-leggeds began to kill without asking permission. They began to take more than they needed. They ceased to give thanks. All parts of the agreement were broken. The great animal councils banded together to determine what they should do to right these wrongs. They needed to protect themselves from destruction and eradication, and so it was decreed by the Animal Council if one of their clan was killed by the two-leggeds and thanks were not given for the sacrifice, the chief animal spirit would afflict the disrespectful killer with a devastating disease. The plants were distressed and said to the animals, "They wrong us too. They dig us up, trample us, burn us out, and don't even listen when we try to tell them what we can do to help them. Yet, we feel compassion for the two-leggeds. Humans struggle to realize their place in the web of creation, and they cannot learn if they're wiped out by disease. Human needs our help. So for every disease you animals bring to them, we, the plant people, will give them a cure. All the two-leggeds have to do is listen when we talk to them." Some may consider this story to be an ancient myth, and it is an old story. However, storying between humans and the natural world continues today. I'm going to read to you a section of a poem by Joy Harjo, Muskogee Creek and Poet Laureate of the United States. This is one segment of her poem, Wolf Warrior. An old Cherokee who prizes wisdom above the decisions rendered by departments of justice told me this story. It isn't Cherokee, but a gift given to him from the people in the North. I know I carried this story for a reason, and now I understand I am to give it to you. A young man, about your age or mine, went camping with his dogs. It was just a few years ago, not long after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, when white ash covered the northern cities, an event predicting a turning of the worlds. I imagine October and bears fat with berries of the brilliant harvest, before the freezing breath of the north settles in and the moon is easier to reach by flight without planes. His journey was a journey toward the unknowable, and that night as he built a fire out of twigs and broken boughs, he remembered the 1,000 white butterflies climbing toward the sun where he had camped there last summer. Dogs were his beloved companions and the land that had chosen him through the door of his mother. His mother continued to teach him well, and it was she who had reminded him that the sound of pumping oil wells might kill him, turn him toward money. So he and his dogs traveled out into the land that remembered everything, including butterflies, and the stories that were told when light flickered from grease. That night, as he boiled water for coffee and peeled potatoes, he saw a wolf walking toward camp on her hind legs. It had been a generation since wolves had visited his people. The dogs were awed to see their ancient relatives and moved over to make room. The lead wolf motioned for her companions to come with her, and they approached humbly, welcomed by the young man who had heard of such goings on. But the people had not been so blessed since the church had fought for their souls. He did not quite know the protocol, but he knew the wolves as relatives and offered them some coffee, store meat, and fried potatoes, which they relished in silence. He stoked the fire and sat quiet with them as the moon, in the form of a knife for scaling fish, came up and a light wind ruffled the flame. The soundlessness in which they communed is what I imagined when I talked with the sun yesterday. It is the current in the river of your spinal cord that carries memory from sacred places, the sound of 1,000 butterflies taking flight in windlessness. He knew this meeting was unusual, and she concurred. then told the story of how the world as they knew it had changed and could no longer support the sacred purpose of life. Food was scarce, pups were being born deformed, and their migrations, which were in essence a ceremony for renewal, were restricted by fences. The world, as all life on earth knew it, would end, and there was still time in the circle of hope to turn back the destruction. That's why they had waited for him, called him here from the town, a day away over the rolling hills, from his job constructing offices for the immigrants. They shared smoke, and he took the story into his blood, while the stars nodded their heads, while the dogs murmured their agreement. We can't stay long, the wolf said. We have others with whom to speak, and we haven't much time. He packed the wolf people some food to take with them, some tobacco, and they prayed together for safety on this journey. As they left, the first flakes of winter began falling and covered their tracks. It was as if they had never been there. But the story burned in the heart of this human from the north, and he told it to everyone who would listen, including my elder Cherokee friend who told it to me one day over biscuits and eggs. The story now belongs to you too. And much as pollen on the legs of a butterfly is nourishment carried by the butterfly from one flowering to another, this is an ongoing prayer for strength for us all. I also have a personal story to share with you that mirrors this story from the north. I have an experience of storying with wolves. It came at a time of great distress for me. I had returned to muscular Apache lands that grew me up. I had taken a leave of absence from my position in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander unit of the University of Queensland to care for my terminally ill father, who lived with my mother in a canyon in the mountains. I wanted to be with my parents in this time of transition. And I was also grieving what seemed a loss to me of my second career. I'd barely begun in middle age and the end of my role in academia. For 3 months, I spent long, hard, dusty days working with my mother to sort through 60 years of family accumulations. At the end of each day, I would drive to a nearby town, buy a latte, and sit under the pinon trees at the end of the local zoo in a tiny oasis, next to the lobos, the Mexican gray wolves. I don't think, looking back, that I had a clear intent. I know I meditated. Maybe I was there to celebrate the tenuous survival of the Mexican grays. Maybe I was there to grieve for the challenges we were both facing. I'm not sure, but I sat there every day in silence and I listened. And after several months, I went one day and found one of the wolves slumped into a depression in the ground. She wouldn't even raise her head. I was really concerned, and I found one of the zookeepers and reported her condition. The zookeeper informed me that it was Lola who was in that depressed state. She was the Mexican gray, credited with whelping the highest number of pups who've been released back into the Gila wilderness. The keeper explained that Lola's daughters had begun fighting with her, and that to reduce the risk of serious injury or death, they had sent Lola's 2 daughters to a zoo in Missouri. But one of Lola's sons was returning from the wilderness, the Gila wilderness. He had 2 claims of cattle death lodged against him. And one of her grandsons, who was in the reintroduction program, were coming to be with Lola. But I was concerned she would die of grief before they arrived, so I went back to her. Thinking of our elders' stories and of N. Scott Momaday's words, and I spoke to Lola the only way I knew how. Waya, Nula, Wolf, come. And I said to her, don't give up hope, they're coming. Your son and your grandson are coming, stay with us, they're coming. And then Lola lifted her head. She leapt up, she whirled in a circle several times, she wagged her tail, and then she came to the fence and invited me to dance with her. For many years, when I returned from Australia, I would visit with Lola, her son, and her grandson, all of whom are now passed on into the spirit world. And their teachings remain with me. The ways in which we story among all our relations shapes the balance and harmony of our cosmos. The survival of us all is dependent on the ways in which we build relationships of respect and reciprocity among all our relations.
Thank you so much, Polly. That was a very, very powerful beginning of this conversation. Also, the awareness of how our stories are connected to stories of other of planetary people all over the world, and how we are intersected with these. I'd like to invite now David Abram to share his view.
There. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Good. Great. Well, I'm speaking to you from the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the upper Rio Grande Valley, home of the Tewa and Tiwa and Towa speaking peoples of the Pueblo villages that surround this region. It's a beautiful blue day. I thought I would start with some words of an old Inuit elder named Nalungiak. Her words were shared with, I think this was up on Baffin Island, where she was met by the Scandinavian explorer Knud Rasmussen. And this is one of the things Nalungiak told to him. It was translated into Danish and then from Danish into English. She said, in the very earliest time, when both people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if she wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. Sometimes they were people and sometimes animals, and there was no difference. All spoke the same language. See, that was the time when words were like magic. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It could suddenly come alive. And what people wanted to happen could happen. All you had to do was say it. Nobody can explain this. That's just the way it was. So it seems to me that certainly that small telling overlaps and echoes deeply what Polly was just sharing with us so beautifully. There is something about story, it seems to me, that tends the earthly rootedness of human language when we are storytelling. It's not the only form of speaking that does this. I would say song and poetry, which grows out of song, also do this. Prayer as well is a form of languaging that honors that earthly rootedness in language. Prayer, by the word, I mean something very simple. All I mean by prayer, our most primordial sense of prayer is not speaking about things and speaking about the world, but rather speaking to things, speaking to the ground, speaking to the wind, speaking to the mountain or the moon. That's all I mean by prayer. And I think these are very, very old ways of wielding our words in our culture. So why is there this deep rapport, it seems to me, between story and land, between story and the breathing earth and all the beings of the earth? Well, let's, of course, remember that we all emerged and evolved, and human culture itself evolved in a manifestly oral context. That is, we were oral peoples long before we became literate creatures. of books and magazines and now of the internet, that we lived for 98, 99% of our human tenure here in this biosphere as people or citizens of deeply oral cultures, that is, cultures that survived and thrived for centuries, for indeed millennia, many millennia, without any context of writing or formalized writing, particularly not any writing systems that were tightly coupled to our spoken language. How is all of the cultural memory handed down in a culture without writing? That is, all the ancestrally gathered knowledge about how to live and where to find particular plants and which plants are good for particular ailments and which are toxic, but also information about how to detoxify those plants and where to find particular animals and how to approach them. All the knowledge that we need to live well in a particular terrain, how is this preserved in a culture without writing? Well, obviously it is because oral cultures are storytelling cultures. So the stories are like the living encyclopedias of an oral culture. They carry all of that ancestrally accumulated and gathered knowledge. It's as if stories are the living encyclopedias of an oral culture. The question, though, remains, how is it that the stories are remembered? How is it that the stories are passed along and handed down? For us, remembrance is not a big deal. We want to remember a particular tale or story. We go to the bookshelf, we find the particular book, we take it down, and we open its pages, and there's the story. Or today, we want to remember a particular tale, we just Google it on our computer, and there it is. But before Google, before screens, and long before books, how were the stories remembered? And the answer to that conundrum has not been well understood, at least by white settler anthropologists and scholars. But I think it's come to light more just in the last couple decades that the stories of a deeply oral culture tend to be associated with particular places in the land where those stories happened. Particular sites, particular bends in a river or cliff sides. So that as you are going about your work, gathering witchetty grubs, hunting for particular foods, and you come upon that bend in the river, it triggers the memory of one or another of the tales that happened there, the stories that unfolded in that place. So to give an example, my friend, the American poet Gary Snyder, was traveling through Australia. He was there a couple decades ago, more like 30 years ago, visiting, and he was traveling through the outback in the red center of Australia with an old Pintubi elder named Grandfather Jimmy Trungarai, who was driving Gary in a pickup truck. And as he was driving, he was pointing out, telling Gary some of the stories that happened in particular places. And he's telling Gary a tale of some of the Wallaby women who were going along there and bumped into some of the green ant men, and they got into a big fight, and the green ants went running up on top of that hill there where they encountered the crocodile people, and whoa, some fornication happened, and the crocodiles came running down this way, but the green ants were going down that way. And he's telling the story so rapidly that Gary Snyder wants him to slow down slow down so he can follow the story, until suddenly Gary realized with a start that, wait a minute, these stories were originally meant to be told while walking, but they're traveling through the outback in a pickup truck. And so they're passing each of the places where these old stories happened, these stories from the dream time. It says something about the intimacy between language and the land in a deeply oral culture, that you have to pace the speed of your speaking to the speed at which you're moving through the terrain. Another example from the same continent, this from further south in that continent, a fellow, an Australian poet named Billy Marshall Stoneking is riding in the back of a pickup with an old elder. He doesn't mention his name, but this elder, this is one of the things he records this elder saying as they're riding in the pickup truck. He says, "See there? That tree is a digging stick left by the giant woman who was looking for honey ants. That rock, a dingo's nose. There on that mountain is the footprint left by Changara on his way to Ulambura. Here, the rock hole of Warnampi, very dangerous. And the cave where the Ni women escaped the anger of Marapulpa, the spider. Ooh, Wati Kujara, the two brothers, they traveled this way. There, you can see. One was tired from too much lovemaking, the mark of his penis dragging on the ground. Here, the bodies of the honey ant men, where they crawled from the sand. No, they are not dead. They keep coming from the ground, moving toward the water at Warumpi. It has been like this for many years. The dreaming does not end. It is not like the white man's way. What happened once happens again and again and again and again. This is the law. This is the power of the stories. Through these stories, the places keep us alive. Through these stories, we keep the places alive. So that's just a way of trying to give a taste of the flavor of what it would feel like to live in a storied landscape where every cliff edge, every cluster of trees, every bend in the river is sprouting with stories. Every bunch of rocks has its tales that tell themselves through you as you wander past that place. So that was what I first wanted to speak of. And then that there are certain qualities that go, it seems to me, with our oral ancestry. Maybe one would be that for an oral culture or a culture of story, the world itself is articulated as story. So the surrounding cosmos is not experienced as a set of fixed and finished facts, but as a story in which we, along with the moon sliding in and out of the clouds and the trout leaping up for a fly, are all participant in this big story. Because the relation of a tale to its characters is pretty much the same as the relation of this earthly cosmos to its inhabitants. Just as there is an interiority to the perceived world, since we're carnally enfolded by the round expanse of the terrain and the curving vault of the sky, so the characters in a well-told tale live and breathe within the voluminous interiority of the story itself. In other words, we find ourselves situated in the land with its transformations and cycles of change, much as protagonists are situated in a story. So to a deeply oral culture, the earthly world is felt as a huge, ever unfolding story in which we, along with the other animals and the plants and the landforms, are all characters. And then also, in such a breathing cosmos, time is not a rectilinear movement from a distant past to a wholly different future. Rather, time has an enveloping roundness, like the encircling horizon. It's a mystery marked by the slide of the sun down into the ground every evening and its rebirth every dawn, by the incessant cycling of the moon and the round dance of the seasons. The curvature of time here is inseparable from the apparent curvature of space, and both remain rooted in the round primacy of place, because each place has its particular pulse. Each realm has its rhythms, its unique ways of sprouting and unfurling and giving birth to itself again and again as the world turns and returns, and as indeed the best stories are told over and over again. And finally, a world made of story is an earth permeated by dreams, a terrain filled with imagination. But this isn't so much our imagination, but rather the world's imagination in which we're participant. So as players within an expansive, ever unfolding story, our lives are embedded within a psyche that is not primarily ours. So have I taken up all my time there? Give me a time check of where I'm at.
Oh, you're still good for another 5 minutes or so if you want.
Oh, okay. So I think I wanted to bring this around to a sense that oral culture has this intimate rootedness in the more than human earth, or rather, let's put it this way, that we of literate culture who take books and magazines and newspapers for granted, in some ways literate culture, the culture of books, is inherently cosmopolitan. It makes possible the sharing of stories from many other places and other times as well. And it makes possible that rich cosmopolitan buzz of our cities, where so many different cultures and tales mingle and intermingle. The culture of the internet, this new form of literacy that's been born in our lifetimes, I would say is rather more abstract. It is inherently cosmopolitan. No, it's more inherently global and globalizing. When I sign on to the internet, I log on with various fairly disembodied minds that have logged on in other places, all of us sort of leaving our bodies immobile as we speak in this global ocean of information. But if the internet is globalizing and enabling the rich and rapid globalization of the economy, for instance, and if literate culture is cosmopolitan, oral culture is local. It's the stories we share that circulate in this terrain and that are different from the stories they're telling on the other side of the Jemez Mountains there, or even on the other side of the Sangres behind me. That is, oral culture is local, and if we honor it and don't write all the stories down, but we leave some tales just for the telling on our tongue with our gesturing body out in the land where those stories happened, or where the events in those stories happened to us. It seems to me that we begin to replenish and rejuvenate the culture of face-to-face storytelling. We rejuvenate oral culture. It seems to me that the replenishment of oral culture is an ecological imperative, that the earth cannot withstand our abstraction much longer, our utter alienation from our felt animal senses. When we're caught up in the cosmopolitan all the time, or now in the globalized world of information all the time, we become blind and deaf to the particulars of our locale, to the sensuous goodness of the particular terrain where each of us lives, and to open our animal senses back onto the animate earth around us. It seems to me we have to begin to replenish oral culture, the culture of face-to-face and face-to-place storytelling. And maybe we can speak a little later about what that might entail. So thanks.
Thank you so much, David. That's a wonderful outline of the locality of knowledge, and also the kind of face to place. I love that expression. That's very good. And also if stories are linked to places, and also the knowledge is linked to places, because knowledge comes in stories. And what does that say about our kind of scientific approach, that is all a philosophical approach that is very also always aiming at universal knowledge and applicable everywhere, and how this is relativized by the locale, basically, that we should cherish much more than we normally do, particular in the settler mindset. Thank you very much. I'm sure that will also be picked up later. Before we have that conversation, I'd like to give the floor now to Juan Sanchez.
Thank you, Koku. Thank you, David. Thank you, Polly, for sharing. Let's see. Storytelling as knowing. So my name is Juan Guillermo Sanchez Martinez. I am originally from this place, Bacata, Bogota. This is the Colombian Andes. What you are looking at is this chaotic and beautiful 10 million people city surrounded by the Cordillera, the Cerros Orientales, Chihuachia, Tensacá. It's known, those hills are known as Guadalupe and Monserrate, which are Catholic names, colonial names, but their original names are Tensacá, Chihuachia, and the Muscobun. Behind there is a special ecosystem where the water is born. It's called Páramo. It's a special ecosystem from the tropics. And this is the place where I am from. And I'm trying to remember until today, you know, where I come from. And so right now I am a visitor in this land, Toquillas-D, in the Salagi language, the place where they raise on the river, the Toquillas-D, but it's, that was called the French Broad. And today this place is called Asheville, North Carolina. And it's also a place of mountains and beautiful people. And I just feel honored and to be here and to be welcomed by not just by the Cherokee, who I work with and who I'm friend with, but with the Latinx community, the African American community, all the scholars in the university, etc. But so thinking about land, this is the place where I am in this morning. This is the place of the black bear and the oaks and the water. You know, a lot of creeks are being born right now in these mountains. And so when I was asked by Daniel Bryan from Pachaysana to participate in this conversation, I was thinking, what can I share? And so I wanted to share today with you a story that was shared to me to be shared, because I believe that the stories have their own spirit, and some stories are to be told in specific places and at specific times. But this one particularly is something that was shared by Nancy Maryboy and David Begay when we were in Santa Marta in Colombia. We were in this beautiful city that is located in the bottom of Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which is the ancestral place of 4 nations, the Iku, the Kogi, the Wiwa, and the Kankwamo. And we were in this gathering of the Latin American Society of Intercultural Studies. And we were with many indigenous scholars from different nations, and we were exchanging knowledge. And Nancy and David accepted my invitation to go and to connect. And they are astronomers, Navajo astronomers, who have been bridging for decades between native science and Eurocentric science. And so in this, it was a beautiful opportunity. Right in this picture, they are talking about Coyote, and who is one of the protagonists, in the creation story of the Navajo sky. And so I'm gonna share this story about uranium. And see, I'm going to do this. So I'm going to read a passage of this, an excerpt of this poem. It was translated from Spanish by me and Lori Jane, a great friend, and it was composed by request of David Begay, and it was written for him, Nancy Maryboy, the Navajo Nation, and for all the territories and communities that have suffered the consequences of radioactivity. Nancy and David are astronomers and educators, elders, who have been bridging native science and Eurocentric science for decades. Uranium recreates a conversation that took place in Santa Marta, Colombia. The previous day, the 3 of us met Mamu Ramon Gil Barros, spiritual guide of the Wiwa, Iku, Kogi, and Kankwamo. So we're not gonna finish the poem. The poem is long, but there is no rush. That's also something that is part of this idea of storytelling, this art, this practice, and it's fine. But I would like to share with you, as I said, this story that is meaningful for me, and we'll see. I'm interested about the connection that also Polly and David are talking about, that many indigenous scholars are written about today, but it's an ancient teaching, and perhaps it's new for, like Western philosophy or, but it's not at all new for the elders in many communities in this planet. And it's the connection between land, body, and language. Look at the desert, silent and expectant, listening to time. What time is this? Where are we? Look at the sun, look on the sand, your empty body, waiting for the wind. It is July 16, 1945, and we are in White Sands, New Mexico. Is this the first dawn or the last? Look at this land, colorful and lonely, holding her breath. At what time, for what reason did we decide to disturb her? Look at the dust, the mushroom of light. the unforgettable bomb. Look at the heat, transparent, rumble, scorching the world to ashes. What time is this? Where are we? We made a serious mistake, the elder David Begay says to me. Nancy Merboy and he have come from Arizona to Santa Marta to give a talk on the Navajo sky while crossing the Yuma River just at the mouth of Bocas de Ceniza. David tells me we must talk about uranium. We are bamboo growing by water, rocked by voices from other times. Have you seen Monument Valley Park? You must have seen it in Hollywood movies. Infinite history of the planet recorded in erosion between Arizona and Utah. What I am exists connected to those sands. One day the company came and asked the elders, don't you know what to do with that land? No one mentioned the consequences. And since there were no jobs, the elders embraced the mines. We are mangroves growing by water, rocked by the paramo and the breeze. Uranium is silver and white, a toxic metal that originates in supernovas, 70% denser than lead. If you disturb it, chain reacts. Can your body exist separated from the land? We rummage the desert in search of uranium. We forget that the elements are interconnected. We leave behind the radium, radioactive gas, radon daughters suspended in air. The miners got sick, their lungs, their kidneys, their shoes, their shirts, their wives, their children, they all accumulated those orphan solids. We are nopales growing along the San Juan River, rocked by the thunder and lightning. The company left overnight. Cancer took the elderly. How were we going to heal if the land was sick? Radon gamma rays penetrated adobe walls, skin of sheep and cows, chromosomes of mothers, of children. But if we are all made the same, if where our eyes see matter, there are webs of electrons, neutrinos, quarks that cross imperceptible through flesh, walls, and these letters that vibrate in this rippling river seem motionless. But if we are all made the same and nothing differs from everything, and this invisible flow holds all things together, why not close our eyes where there are no eyes to finally play the song shaking within light? Listen to the children, 10 and smiling, playing with the mind tailings. What planet is this? In what galaxy are we? Listen to the placenta, a wounded girl, invoking the first dawn. Is there any way, Mamo Ramon, to cleanse the blood, the sea? Listen to the eyes, all and silent, washing us from the river of blood. At what time, for what reason did we start to get sick? Listen to the molecules, inherited pain, longing for medicines. Listen to the wires, barbs, sirens, radioactive land we can no longer cross. What planet is this? In what galaxy are we? Of the 500 mines that exist on the reserve, an area as big as Costa Rica, 30 million tons of uranium have been extracted. In our language, we say Bikaya, to name the land, she who is under the moccasins. We are steps touching roots, inventing paths on sand. Today, you cannot stand for even an hour on those abandoned mines. And I wonder who is now going to trace with his weight flowers and mandalas upon the desert. We are souls of feet inhaling earth, exhaling designs and destinies. You ask me how to heal, and perhaps you can face the sickness with your mind, with your heart. But if the land is sick, how are you going to heal your body? We are maps, furrowed by our own steps, die by suck, by pulse, by words. I would like to stop there and just leave you with that question. That is the question that the elder David Begay shared with me to share with you. How are we going to heal our body if the land is sick? So thank you, and we will. I will continue. I will work in the workshop about this land body language connection. If you would like to be part of it later. Thank you for listening.
So beautiful, man. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And that is also already a very good invitation for a conversation. And I'd like to invite the other panelists, so Polly and David, to comment on that. And also maybe Juan, if you want to add something to what the others have said. So there were clearly a couple of themes that resonate in all the three contributions, and that's wonderful to see. Also the aspect that Juan brought in of healing, how you can heal through stories. Maybe are there healing stories? Are they related to the land? And if the land is sick, these are very good questions. I'm curious what the others have to say about that.
My heart is singing at the moment about the connections between all of our presentations. We didn't know what each other was going to present. And just when David began his part of the presentation, it was a story of the Inuit elder and how freely we used to pass between animals and humans. And Juan, that painting of Coyote creating the Milky Ways hanging over my bed, and that valley where you tell the story, you know, of the light of the atomic bomb that was blown over all of our relations. That's the valley where I grew up, and that's the valley where Lola lived her entire life. So the things I'm sort of resonating with at the moment, and to me sort of seeing out from stories, are these connections, that we restore connections when we story together, and then also then the responsibility that the story calls for us. The stories are alive and they call us to live in respect and reciprocity. And in thinking about, you know, the same thing from the story from the North that Cherokee elder shared with Joy Harjo, that I shared with you, that calling this that the land is ill and we are ill. The story of the bomb, what the destruction that the bombs have done all over in the United States, in Japan, and the atolls and other places they've been exploded. So that call for all of us, what is our responsibility to the life of these stories?
Yes, and this all brings me round and back to a sense I was trying all too briefly to speak of, which is how stories are always bodily. At least if we take story in this most basic form that each of the three of us has been taking the term, because one can also take story very widely and say that the things that the current occupant of the White House tweets out on his Twitter account are also stories. But we're speaking of story in an older, deeper, fuller sense as a kind of magic that binds the human soul, the human body, to the breathing earth. Somehow, it seems in our ancestral stories, in our deep stories that come from our oral ancestry and inheritance. There's these certain qualities, one that everything is alive. Nothing is inert or inanimate, but everything has agency, moves. It's just some things move a lot slower than other things, but everything still moves, has power, has potency. And also this other curious common element that everything speaks, although most things don't speak in words, but things speak. Any sound can be a voice, any movement can be a gesture, a meaningful expression. Of course, not just things of the natural world, but the airplane that was just soaring overhead, monopolizing the soundscape. That too is a voice. And how does that, certainly my body receives meaning from that, is moved, is shifted, and also informed about the power of human artifice to monopolize the soundscape and sort of overcome everything else. But even the refrigerator humming in my kitchen is a kind of voice. So everything moves, everything speaks, but then the land itself or the earth itself then is multiply alive, is alive in so many different ways, through each animal, through each plant, through the wind or a gust of wind or a storm cloud. And hence the human body is never just this body, but it feels itself always in resonance or reciprocity with the larger body of the world. And that sense that whenever we hear a story well told, our body inhabits it, much like we find ourselves within the landscape. So the interiority of a story is much like the interiority of this breathing earth. And there's a sense in which that comes also from hearing this powerful poem that Juan was sharing. There's a sense that comes that this body, my two-legged, two-armed form, is just my small body, and the land, the earth itself, is my larger flesh. And then there's that reciprocity between those, always moving in the questions Juan was asking in the later lines of the poem. That's some of what I think of.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Juan.
you. Yeah, I just wanted to, of course, like all the stories that we share are connected, and so stories are constantly they are, how do I say this? In my experience, stories are never the same. They are like people, you know, they are like the water, you know, the creek that I go to see, you know, every time that I go to visit the creek is not the same creek, you know, that's a story that is in many traditions. But so what I'm trying to say is that based on the circle, right now we have a circle here. So these stories are being called, and then these stories start flowing in a certain way because of us, because our words, because our intentions, and they resonate in certain ways. And even if the words are the same, the story is also flowing differently. And so that's one thing that I wanted to say, and it's beautiful because when stories meet with each other, So there is also something happening there. And sometimes the stories don't allow to be heard, you know, and sometimes the stories, some pieces of the story stick with you, and then you forget the rest. And that's part of the work of the story itself. The storyteller yeah, like prepares himself, herself in a way that you know, those waves of knowledge pass through, and it's a way to think about it, you know. I was thinking that in the, you know, in that connection, land, body, language, and I think that is powerful what you were saying, David and Polly, is that it's not just that we remember through the land, but it's also that the place remember through us. And through us, it's not just humans, but everybody else who is singing, you know. And I wanted to bring into the conversation this discipline of biophony, and that is right now like doing an interesting research about, you know, like sound and soundscaping, because again, this is nothing new for indigenous practices and stories, but it's important to remember that we all have the possibility to produce sounds. And when I say all, you know, this biophony is showing how the trees is also producing sounds, you know, and in a lot of sounds, you know, and the sounds that are surrounding constantly are when they are natural, they don't overlap. I mean, they don't try to quiet the other one, or to speak louder, or there are like different frequencies, like in the and they, so there's a beautiful teaching in all that is being said, but it's also part of the old teaching that we all have a song, we all have a story. And so that question is beautiful. It's like, what is your story and what is your song? Because and so thinking about that, that behind that is the question, where are you from? And behind that is the question, you know, how you body is being right now, you know. And so, and yeah, so I just wanted to share those thoughts.
Thank you. I think this is a good moment to open up the conversation with the audience. And while the Q&A is filling up, not overwhelmingly so yet, but please use the Q&A if you have any questions, and we will collect that. And while you think about your questions, I'd like to invite Whitney, who also has a comment to share on this.
Thank you so much, Kako, and thank you all so much for sharing your places and stories. It was just beautiful. And I'm sitting here thinking about the stories our immediate backgrounds tell, like bookshelves over here and the tapestry and the poster of the phase of the moon, your beautiful ceiling there, David. Anyways, I'm thinking about what our immediate backgrounds tell us, what stories they tell as well. Well, so you kind of hinted on this, David, but there are so many stories, and I'm a fan of multiplicity in the multiverse and the multiply narrated multiverse. But then what do we do, right, with fake news, alternative facts? What do we do with the stories that are so destructive, right? So I guess I'm asking sort of what are some criteria that you that any of you maybe sort of go by to sort of judge the validity of stories and sort of which stories are more healing than others or better than others?
Mm. Well, one element in that would surely be that has run through the three presentations just now, the way certain stories speak and proclaim and imply a massive sense of human ascendance, of human exceptionalism, of human mind standing over and apart and telling a story from above, looking upon the world, whereas other stories, often of an older register and an older ancestry, but some of them quite new and just being born now, speak from a place of deep humility and a rich sense of the radical, irreducible pluralism and plurality of voices, most of which don't even speak in words, and yet still are richly meaningful. And so that would certainly be something I look for is does a story have that old ancestral sense of humility that seems so key to the human organism? And one other I'll just mention is the question, does this story make sense? But by making sense, I mean that in a very palpable sense. Does it make my animal senses wake up? My eyes, my skin, my ears, even my taste buds. Does it wake up my senses to where I actually am, planting me bodily right here in this particular locale with its weird colors and shapes and textures and rhythms? That's a couple criteria.
And I would like to add on to what David said, that from my perspective and the teachings that have been shared with me, that a story that's healing is one that and somehow calls out to us, that sings out to us, to use Juan's words, about balance and harmony. Noati, about moving in this good medicine way. And the story might be something about, again, singing that up in a good way, showing how balance and harmony has been restored, but also a warning about when we're out of. So I think how Juan's poem did that so powerfully, on the Navajo reservation, and so many lands in our planet have been damaged by uranium, by nuclear fallout. And that warning, again, a warning, we're out of balance, or it's a call that we need to move back toward this. Or it might be a singing of a success story about moving back in balance and harmony.
When I was thinking about this moment, I thought about two books. And one is Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. And another one is The Truth About Stories by Thomas King. This is, and they are connected, like our stories. This is, and it's beautiful to think, because they explain clearly how for indigenous peoples in Abya Yala, it's not about the good story or the bad story, because in order to, everything is negative and positive, everything, and that needs each other. But it's when things are unbalanced that it requires work and coherence. And so to be careful with your words, with your thoughts, with your actions is part of the work. And this is personal and collective. And so in these books, King quotes Leslie Marmon Silko. And there is a moment in the novel that a group of witches are together and they are doing this, like dark stuff. And they have this contest. And in this context, they are, so it says like this: stories are wondrous things and they are dangerous. The native novelist Leslie Silko, in her book Ceremony, tells how evil came into the world. It was witch people, not whites or Indians or blacks or Asians or Hispanics, witch people from all over the world way back when, and they all came together for a witches conference in a cave, having a good time, a contest, actually, to see who could come up with the scariest thing. Some of them brew up potions in pots, some of them jump in and out of animal skins, some of them thought up charms and spells. It must have been fun to watch, until finally there was only one witch left who hadn't done anything. No one knew where this witch came from, or if the witch was male or female. And all this witch had was a story. Unfortunately, the story this witch told was an awful thing, full of fear and slaughter, disease and blood. A story of murderous mischief. And when the telling was done, the other witches quickly agreed that this witch had won the prize. Okay, you win, they said, but what you said just now, isn't it so funny? It doesn't sound so good. We're doing okay without it. We can get along without that kind of thing. Take it back. Hold the story back. But of course, it was too late. For once a story is told, it cannot be called back. Once told, it is loose in the world.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Maybe you can put in the titles and the authors in the chat so everyone can follow up on that. And there's also Lisa Schweitzer had a question, I think that matches this conversation very well that you just talked about. And she asks, how can we revitalize the deeply local oral tradition of storytelling in an ever cosmopolitan and globalized world, especially in today's context of a polluted, sick earth and global pandemic? So I wonder if you want to respond to that.
Well, I don't think it's so hard, really. But I do think it has something to do with the pleasure of telling and the pleasure of hearing or listening to a story well told. And here I don't mean a story that's read to me from a book or read to you from a book, although books are incredible repositories of magic. Let's be clear. But underneath the layer of books, there is something much older within us that responds to stories when we hear them, particularly being told by someone with their whole body, who's not gazing down at a page, but who is enacting the story or gesturing. And especially if a story is told out of doors in the land and is linked to, do you see that mountain ridge? Do you know how that strange nose on that ridge came to be there? Who this being was who lay down there? Or this pool, this lake, and how this came to be. That is binding stories directly into the land with our whole body. And so it's a question I have for also Juan and for Polly is, do you think that there's something important today about there being some stories we find or that find us that we don't write down? And so we don't steal it from the place or the region where the story came to us, but we tell the story with our tongue and our whole organism out in that place. Perhaps we only tell it in the appropriate season, which is when those bears come wandering through, or when the salmon are surging back up the rivers. And we gather people for the telling, because it seems to me that there's that direct, intimate, erotic interchange between the human animal body and the animate earth that then comes into play. Once we write stories down, of course, they can be taken elsewhere and read in distant cities and distant continents, and all that place-specific magic can be forgotten. And there's also the sense that the letters and the writing on a page intercede between our senses, between my eyes and the living landscape around me. So isn't there something important about leaving some space in our days for, and some space in our writing, well, for stories that I'm not going to write down, but I'm going to plant it back in the earth, in that place, and tell the story of what happens in that place with my whole body and gather people for the telling. It's a practice I'm certainly deeply dedicated to.
Thank you. We have reached or are about to reach the end of this part of the conversation. And also, if you go to the chat, you also see that there are some more questions that resonate with what you said. For instance, Stephanie Creedlow, who said that there is it is not so much which stories are healing, but what aspects of stories are healing, and can they manifest into a larger story that is healing for all. I think that resonates quite nicely with what has been said. How do we connect these stories to a larger community, even if they are local, and we should also protect the locality of the stories and do not steal them, and at the same time bring the message of these stories somewhere else and connect to other stories. I think that it was a very, very powerful image as well. I'd like to close this part of the conversation now, but not without thanking everyone on the panel and also the participants once more, and also without thanking our sponsors, which also means that if you, so as you know, of course, this is, we organize this free of charge, but if you like what we are doing here, feel free to donate to the Pachaisana or to the Counterpoint or to the Wolfsonian Lab, who made this happen. And I think Grace will put the links into the chat if you want to donate. We are more than happy to accept also small amounts of money to continue this work in a meaningful way. I think I'd like to hand over to Daniel now, who will say a little bit about a teaser, let's put it that way, for the workshop that will follow after a 15 minutes break with Juan Sanchez. And I hope all of them or most of you will stay on to that workshop. I'm certainly very excited about that. And Daniel, maybe you can say a little bit more about what what will happen there.
Yeah, just before that, Daniel, I'd just like to just give a bow to Polly and to Juan for delightful exchange. I found very beautiful what each of you brought forth here. Thanks so much.
And I would also like to say, thank you. I'm very grateful to David and Juan and to our sponsors and hosts.
Same here. Thank you. Thank you so much for this space, for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, wow, what a tremendous conversation that we just had. I can speak from the point of view of Pache-san and say that I feel like I just got a free class session that this recording can now be used with our students. And, you know, I anticipate also putting Spanish subtitles to be able to share with local communities here in Ecuador. Thank you, Polly, David, and Juan for your contributions. And something that's very important in these webinars is that we talked about not stealing stories toward the end, right? And there comes a time when we have to create stories. And so we've created a space that will begin here in about 15 minutes in which we can work together to create. So much work done online, well, extremely, extremely important. And what we just did can obviously stand alone. But doesn't really feel that circle that Juan was talking about. And so we're going to try to engage in that circle and do some work in which we make that linkage between land, language, and body. So I invite you to come back in 15 minutes and take a little break, bathroom, coffee, or just walk outside, whatever it is you feel you might want to do to connect with land, language, and body just beforehand. And then Juan Sanchez will facilitate our workshop just afterwards. So thank you so much for joining us. Once again, it's a huge help and also just a huge symbol of support by making a small donation to the work that both organizations are doing. We divide those donations equally so that we can continue with the work that we're doing. And we look forward to seeing you. All you have to do is stay on. You don't you can stay on, and then we will eventually make you all panelists for this for the next section, and that way you can then have control of your own microphone and your own camera. Participation is how you define participation. So if you don't feel comfortable in certain points sharing completely, that's fine. That's what this is about. Okay, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So Juan, did you want to? Oh, okay. All right. I look forward to that part of today's workshop, and so see you in 15 minutes.
I think we'll give everybody maybe just a couple more minutes since instead of 11:45, since we ended, I think, at about 11:35. So people are a little more regenerated for the workshop. So maybe just a couple more minutes here.
Yeah, for sure. I was wondering if everybody's gonna have, I mean, everybody's gonna be, it's gonna have the possibility to show their camera, and we're gonna be able to make groups and small rooms, etc. Yeah.
Yes, I think, let me see if, I don't know if we can do breakout rooms actually.
Oh,
Anyway, we can do it without, because we're in a webinar format. And
yeah, exactly.
I did not think of that ahead of time. I thought it was going to go into I thought this was going to go into a meeting format, but we're sticking in the webinar format. Can we make this as maybe from individual to collective? I know that's kind of like last minute to throw that in there.
Yeah, well, I thought about it, so I have a plan B, but
Okay.
yeah, so yeah, it's fine. So we'll see. You know, what is interesting is that workshops, you don't know what is going to happen.
Yeah, we are, unfortunately, we're learning as we go as well, and trying to figure out, you know, learning Zoom space as we go, and not in the different formats as well. So,
also, sorry, Daniel, I was just going to say, yeah, I was just going to say, I think that we don't want to record this part, right? Yeah. So Javier, I don't know